Joining us. My name is Peter Stubbe. I am proud to work with Robocorp. And for those of you who don't know us, we are a company that is bringing forth an exciting new approach to the automation industry. In a single sentence, we are an open source, cloud native, and modern platform focused on empowering RPA professionals to produce more sustainable and cost-effective automations. As most of you know, the RPA industry has historically been dominated by just a few vendors. What you may also realize is that these quote unquote Gen 1 providers of RPA are commonly constrained by, and this is not limited to, their proprietary tool sets, license-based upfront pricing, high infrastructure costs, and antiquated development and deployment experiences. In light of the innovation that Robocorp is now offering the industry, today we will discuss the risks and rewards of migrating, replacing, and/or a multi-vendor strategy. In order to do so, we've enlisted a panel of automation industry titans. Shail Chiara will soon be moderating and driving the discussion. Shail has spent the last half-decade building the intelligent automation market, which comprises of both RPA and AI technologies. As a unicorn in intelligent automation and digital transformation, he has served as a CMO and chief customer officer at 3 leading automation firms, helping to shape this industry. He is also the founder of Vocal, an independent automation customers only group, which aptly stands for the voice of the customer in the automation landscape, and now has over 50 key decision makers in the automation industry from across the globe. We are also joined by Olivier Gomez, aka OG. He is a recognized global expert and pioneer in the field of intelligent automation and RPA. He is also the CEO and co-founder of Robocorp partner IAC. As a senior executive with 23 plus years experience, he is a leader of large-scale automation transformations with strong ROI for the Fortune 2000. Olivier scaled and ran one of the largest automation footprints in the world for HP DXC, which included over 6,000 unique bots, which gives him a very good grasp of operational aspects as well. And lastly, Antti Karolainen, CEO and co-founder of Robocorp. Antti is a longtime open source enthusiast with a background in software engineering. He serves on the board of Robot Framework Foundation and is leading the charge when it comes to evolution within the automation industry, focusing specifically on eliminating the boundaries that have plagued the sector to date. Before handing the floor to Shail, please keep in mind that today's webinar is being recorded and a replay will be published soon after. Also, at the end, we will leave a few minutes for audience Q&A. You may submit either in the chat or using the Q&A function in the Zoom. With that said, Shail, the floor is yours. Good luck, guys.
Peter, thank you. Really appreciate it. Welcome all to this exciting session of the future of RPA, migrating to Gen 2 tools. RPA, as many of you know, has had an interesting history and is continuing to evolve. And with over 65 companies in the space, 12 acquisitions that have occurred in just the last 24 months, this industry continues to evolve and continues to be disrupted. And disruption is a natural evolution. It's happening now. We've seen it in the first wave of RPA players. We've seen consolidations, and we've also most recently, amongst the big 3, we're seeing a private equity takeover very recently. Antti is joining us from rainy Helsinki, and Olivier is in what seems to be a very calm evening in your window there in south of France. Welcome, Antti and Olivier. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Let's dive right in. This is sort of a no-spin zone where we want to talk about what's next beyond RPA. And automation, as you know, is a very hot topic. There's around $9 billion of investment that has gone in this space in the last 30 months. And before we talk about Gen 2, let's put the customer in the center of our conversation and talk about what are the customer needs? What is it that is not being fulfilled with the traditional automation, say Gen 1?
Yeah, I mean, Oliver, you go first.
Sure. Let me show my view here. So first of all, what's really important to understand is that this is a very normal and natural evolution for any new technology. RPA and the entire ecosystem is a new segment in the software industry. By the way, I think it is the fastest growing segment in the software industry. If I'm trying to explain what's in the mind of most of the customers nowadays, it's very simple. They are starting to expect and demand outcome. They are, slightly over the excitement wave that happens when something new is created. Trying to give a comparison, right? When electricity was invented, people were super excited and super amazed by the capability, right? Very similar capability, maybe not for super geek people, but for most of the world, having a bot that can do work for you and take over the task that you don't want to do. It's pretty cool. It's pretty overwhelming. I think now we are over this innovation wave, and we are starting to enter what I would call an industrialized wave, where people are starting to have normal expectation. Nowadays, when people talk about electricity, they talk about how much it costs, as simple as that. So they have an evolved expectation around this innovation. Very similar here. Clients are expecting outcome, and there's things like, what is the return on my investment? There's things like, can you drop the total cost of ownership of running a bot? Can you increase my time to value so that I can basically get the result not in 6 months, but in a matter of weeks. So those are the things that that I would say the market is starting to request and expect, and again, pretty normal as we are starting to exit this excitement, new shiny object type of phase, right?
Yeah. So as I look at the first wave of RPA, it was driven by a few companies out there. Obviously UiPath done great for themselves, Automation and Blueprint, some kind of the notable first growers in there. There probably has been others. Then at some point, let's say a few years back, I felt that there was an RPA company coming out every week. I used to see a new one entering the space, and it was always, we saw a lot of copycats like me too. We can do that too. It's the same thing. And for the longest time, for instance, the licensing pattern has been the same. It's always bot license, it's orchestration license, something tied to the execution units. And now finally we have kind of with the first wave going, past that first hype cycle in a way, starting to see something new emerging from these sort of second wave companies that are starting to rethink how we do things in RPA, what is driving real customer value, how these RPA projects are being built and run and operated and maintained and even sunset at the end of the project. We've seen this a few years go by and understand a lot more. So I think the first wave really started, the earliest parts of it started like in the early 2000s, actually, when these technologies were being built. It can be considered even fairly legacy oriented technology built on top of mostly .NET, and now we've seen that play through all the way to IPO and private equity takeovers and so forth. So now I think it's time to see the second wave that starts building on top of the learnings of that first wave.
So outcomes are clearly important. Value to customers is clearly important. The architecture that the supposedly first generation was built on versus addressing bot fragility issues going forward, addressing the ability to integrate multiple sets of technologies going forward is becoming more and more important to customers. And that's what I keep hearing when I talk to customers on a constant basis. They're not classifying Gen2 as a label, but indeed they're looking for a change beyond what they have today. So what is Gen2 in your mind? And should it be yet another label in a series of labels that we have in this market. How do you define Gen2?
Well, if I go first as the tech vendor here, what we try to do is obviously build RPA from first principles. We've seen the demand side growing. What got me excited in RPA when I first bumped into it years ago, it was actually the demand side of it. So I could see that pretty much everyone out there will have demand for a bot-based automation capability. So being able to deploy these agents to run as digital employees. Now that still exists, and that's actually broadening to the mid-market, and soon we're going to see these bot technologies being embedded into pretty much any software platform out there. So people are going to be using bots whether they know it or not. So it's going to be a capability that's sticking around, but kind of to start with the first principles in mind, what makes a great bot platform. We started obviously with the bot developer in mind, and developed a system that's suitable for that automation engineer persona. Now we're adding low code on top of it, but the automation engineer has always been the front and center of our focus. And then trying to innovate on the pricing models. Is there a better way to price bots than on these execution unit licenses? Now we chose to price against the consumption of these bots runtime, kind of the minute-based wage for the bot, if you will use that analogy, and it's kind of a fundamental change when you start. You kind of take a first gen tool that's been grown to like 500-600 million in ARR, and all of a sudden flip a switch and say now we're consumption based. That's something that can't be done that easily. But when you're starting with the new product in mind, you can actually architect that kind of pricing in the center of it. So we're kind of seeing these lower TCO, faster ROI, more flexible delivery, more integratability, more embeddability. So you can actually build these bots inside your own platform to actually drive your own product. So I think these are kind of the labels of the second generation. Now, obviously, there's open source. That's one angle to it, but it's all of these above.
Olivier, what are your thoughts? How do you
Yeah, if I take a slightly different angle here, which is I would say kind of a tech agnostic angle to what is Gen2. Again, we now start to understand clearly that this technology, or those set of technology, they do work. They are here to stay. They are basically conceptually removing this human glue that we have been using to compensate from lack of integration and lack of it's a capability, and we are now replacing this human glue with a digital worker glue, a digital glue. So this is here to stay, and no matter how you look at it, there's a certain set of expectations that are clearly starting to be very, very clear. So cloud, for example, is obvious that this is becoming a default expectation for those technology. The flexibility on let's say the license model, i.e. as a service, i.e. subscription type of approach. I mean, those are non-technical requirements that clients are starting to demand so that you have the simplicity, you have the speed, and you have the flexibility that is required to be able to handle this new technology and to scale. Because the goal here is, once we are past this initial hype wave of I play with the tool and I'm building trust that the tool can do the job, now I need to start scaling seriously. And if you have a weak return on investment because you are using a technology that has a super high license cost, as an example, then I can tell you that there's no way you are going to scale, even if the technology does the job, because the CFOs and actually your business case will turn red everywhere, right? So again, what is Gen2? It's simply the disruptors that come after the innovators that are listening to the requirements from the client, and they embed that natively in their technology. And those who are able to do that, they will basically, do very well, because they will enable the client to achieve outcome and to, basically do what is required to have this digital workforce replace this human glue we've had forever.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. First of all, human glue sounds pretty suspicious to me, by the way, as a concept. But in general, we've seen RPA COEs in major corporations being built on the first generation. They get a lot of value from the first projects that they go through and build out a massive digital workforce. But at some point, they hit a ceiling. They say, we cannot actually go beyond what we have reached here so far with the first gen technology, whether it's depending on the licensing or the cost structure, or whether it's just the technical limitations of a tool that they've chosen. So they kind of start looking for this dual vendor strategy, where they want to bring in another tool to augment their capabilities. Obviously, we've been in many of those discussions, and a lot of times the first gen vendors, what they've done now, obviously huge market penetration, like a ton of sales, net new sales happening, and now they need to expand. So what they start doing is they start horizontally adding solutions, whether it's process mining, whether it's chatbots, hyper automation, all of that, and capability to expand on the customer accounts. But these customers that are saying that, okay, we've hit the ceiling, now we don't need to add yet another hyper automation capability. We want to just add more bots. How can we do that? And that's where technologies like Robocorp come in and can really help them augment that.
And just to add to that, because I want to give a practical example here. Typically, when you start, you identify activity that you want to automate in high cost location. When you start scaling and you are a global organization and you want to scale across the world, including Asia, right? The cost structure is going to be totally different, and it's going to be more and more difficult to basically build a case to do automation in area where, it is not Europe, it is not US, right? So those are examples of things that are, that ceiling that Antti is describing, can materialize in different ways. But as you want to start scaling, I don't want more features. I want the core structure of what I am deploying to be right. And that's really important.
So I think, Olivier, you make a very important point about the core structure, and this ties back to what I was mentioning earlier about the bot-based architecture with which Gen1 started. There was also mention of scale. So are you both saying that Gen2 actually allows you to scale faster because the core fundamental technology is a differentiator? What are your thoughts around what makes, first of all, does Gen2 allow you to scale faster, which there are challenges in Gen1, and if so, what enables you to do that?
If you think about, we need to actually separate whether we're talking about mid-market versus the enterprise. Obviously, the enterprise will stick around with Gen1 for a longer time. Mid-market hasn't really started with RPA, so we've seen a ton of uptake with RPA in the mid-market, where we can see like our partner ecosystem, for instance, taking Robocorp and really running that as a service to offer the business outcome of bots, and kind of scale down market where we haven't been seeing RPA that much. But just talking about the enterprise itself, any thoughts on that, Olivia, on your side?
So for me, the scalability of a technology is not always related to the technology itself, but it's included, right? So again, back to my point, it's all about going through the different approvals inside an organization and validation inside an organization that actually what you are doing is positively impacting the P&L of the organization, top or bottom of the P&L. But you have to have visible effect of what you are doing. So back to the technology, if I am deploying something that is allowing me to positively impact the P&L, everyone in the organization, the CIO, the CFO, and the COO will ask for more. If I am working with a technology provider that understand that, I'm working as a service provider that understand that, then all the rest is virtually details. Of course, you will hit limitation with certain vendor, which will force you to move to someone who doesn't have those constraints. But conceptually, the scalability of a technology is simply related to does it make a difference to the business? If yes, I want more. If I want more, I'm looking for the right technology. If I don't have the right partner right now, I switch. Obvious.
Yeah, I see that the enterprise is still very focused on the COE led model. Where we've seen RPA scale up, it's always been driven by the COE. Really, the citizen developer model hasn't really come through in that way, or I haven't been able to observe it in the market when talking with customers that they had adapted a citizen developer led path and just scaled tremendously with positive results. Where we've seen scaling up, definitely driven always by COE, and there we typically see more technically capable COEs being able to take technologies like Robocorp and then run with that and continue forward scaling past the first initiatives.
And another point that is important here that is I would say related to running the automation, so automation ops, or whatever you want to call it, right? You basically are going to scale if you can handle what you have today. And back to the point, we have seen many COE that are slowly evolving from a team of people building bots to a team of people doing support of the bots. And then you are back to the typical IT issue, right? If I have 80-90% of my resources maintaining what I have instead of innovating, I'm again reaching a ceiling. It's a very typical situation. So the capability of the technology, the vendor, and the service provider to be able to run the footprint efficiently so that you can keep scaling and you don't collapse. This is absolutely critical. And Gen2, if I have a native cloud-based solution that is giving me instant, let's say, instantiation of my bot, that is giving me 99.9% uptime, so I don't have to worry about that, and plenty of other things that will help my run and maintain phase, then I am a lot more comfortable to grow my digital workforce because I can handle it. Really
great point, by the way. We have a good article that we authored around automation ops. Fully agree with that point of view. Just happens so that we actually incorporate that kind of modern DevOps type of operational model into the product itself, which again didn't happen with the first generation because they started out with this model that this is going to be outside of the IT, like not part of the IT organization. Slip it in under the covers and nobody needs to know. Well, you build 100 bots, somebody needs to know about that and maintain them for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point that you bring up. And customers generally tend to migrate to alleviate the pain points that they have and that are not being met with their current solutions, right? So clearly in the market, we're seeing a multi-vendor RPA strategy, but in addition to that, additional technologies are being added to the stack, right? You talk about chatbots, analytics, AI, process mining capabilities. Why is this migration required? Why do you think a customer should migrate? When should they migrate from a Gen 1 to a Gen 2?
Well, from our perspective, sometimes it's just required because a vendor might be, updating. You typically see in the enterprise specifically, you see that your customers are going to be lagging multiple versions with a on-premise deployment. Now, Gen 2 being typically cloud native, you don't see that kind of lag behind in versions. So you actually might hit a natural point of, hey, we don't even support that version anymore. You need to rebuild your bots. It's a natural breakpoint in that evolution where you might consider migrating away. Then there might be events like a private equity takeover that starts lets the customers start thinking about, hey, is this going to be the company who's going to be innovating for the next coming 5 years? Should I sign up for a multi-year license commitment to this company? That's another natural breakpoint. But all in all, this is something that happens with every technology out there. Like every possible technology that we see go through these evolution cycles is bound to have a first wave and another wave with migrations involved. We've seen it with video conferencing, for instance, everyone migrating over to Zoom, when we've seen kind of clear winner. Microsoft is in there with Teams. We've seen it with the iPaaS vendors. We used to have TIBCO started out in the late 90s. Then we have other players, MuleSoft and so forth. It's just a constant evolution that happens in the space and part of the natural progression of, well, for instance, the cloud that really didn't exist when the first generation RPA players were being created. That kind of just sets it up for a generation change.
Yeah, and so the way I look at it, right, is so first of all, obviously, this is something that evolves all the time. This ecosystem that we are describing is changing all the time. It's alive, and as anything alive, things die, things come in, and that evolution is pretty much the same as any other IT space. It has to be managed, and this idea of there is a risk to migrate, be careful. This is a very close to, to me, this is very close to, I'm trying to build stickiness here, into this environment. At the end of the day, we can talk about that in details, but obviously, as any change, there is a risk. That risk can be very easily managed. It's not too far away from, I have a bot that breaks and I got to fix it. It's another a bit more advanced way of, I'm rewriting it, I'm redoing it, I'm converting, I'm migrating. But at the end of the day, I want to downplay that, right? I mean, it's very natural, it's very normal. You are totally free. You don't want to be stuck. You want to have multiple vendors. You want to go for the one that gives you what you need. And the benefits that we see by having this freedom to move to the right place is by far exceeding the risk that you are taking to do so.
But one thought that comes to mind is that there is a lot of challenge with upgrades. Olivier, I'm sure as you went through 6,000 bots in prior engagements you've had, you may have gone through some upgrade cycles as well. In the market today, there's about 25,000 customers in the market, and 50% of them are still sitting on legacy automation software, older versions of the software, right? And why? Because upgrades are a pain and bots tend to break. It's the bot fragility that I was talking about earlier. And while the majority of the Gen 1 vendors are adding to their TAM, their total addressable market, many customers still cannot take advantage of those new functionalities because they haven't upgraded. So if upgrades are a pain, what makes it easy for customers to migrate?
Yeah, that's a good point. Upgrades are oftentimes pain, especially like I said, running on-prem. We've seen that actually migration work. If you think about just pure migration of an existing bot that might have taken months to implement in the first run, when you do migrate it, it's typically fraction of the time involved. So it actually might be proportional to a migration workload that you might be looking at otherwise in any case. So we've seen instances where it takes we had a customer who migrated away from one of the first gen platforms, and they had multiple bots that they had built across a 6-month time period, and they were coming up on their license terms, so they were a bit in a rush. They brought in a Robocorp partner to handle the migration. Took them under 30 days from zero to running in production those new bots, taking rid of the old Gen 1 licenses. And while the partner was doing that migration, their own internal team got ramped up on the technology and started producing other automations already on top of the platform. So think about 6-month initial implementation, 30-day replacement implementation. So that kind of gives you a perspective on the fact that when you architected the automation, you figured out all the pain points, you kind of have it defined already. It's much easier to go about and just go with the migration.
Yeah, and to that point, right? When you are starting to seriously embed automation, intelligent automation into your company strategy, and you want to seriously scale across every department, every aspect of your business, because you see the value, you want to make sure the foundations are right. I remember, many years ago, right? When people were outsourcing their IT because they had a mess and they were looking for someone to help them, clean up that mess. To some extent, people moving away from data center into cloud because they are looking for, a framework. They are looking for a structure. They are looking for best practices. This is required in that space. The foundation before you scale have to be right. The right technology platform, building the bot in the right way. And I even expect here that some of those bot footprint will be outsourced to people who are specialized in running the bot on behalf of the customer, the same way we were running IT and we are running IT on behalf of the customer. This is a new wave of please help me manage. And my point here is, if you are running in the wrong direction because you have made wrong decision, wrong choices, it's time to reconsider, before you run even faster, to change your direction, to make sure that, you stop digging.
Yeah, it's not even wrong choices, by the way. It's the best choice with the knowledge at the time. Yes. And things happen in the marketplace. The previous innovator becomes the laggard, and you kind of see that it's not going to be a platform where you want to continue investing in. So kind of naturally occurring evolution that we spoke of.
Well, let's talk about this migration itself. Again, putting the customers back in the center of our conversation. Are there examples of customers that you've come across that are migrated to this newer Gen 2 type of a platform, and what's the outcome there?
Yeah, I can obviously speak to Robocorp specific examples here, but just mentioned that one customer migrating from Gen 1 is actually automation anywhere where they were coming off from, and doing a replacement of what took 6 months to implement the first round in 30 days. And at the same time, they noticed that the complexity of the bot actually shrunk down significantly, because they had to build in a ton of error handling in the first version of the bot that they did, due to fragility issues of the underlying technology. So they had massive complexity related to error handling that they could actually skip with using our technology, which is more programmable in nature. And that was one example. What has been super curious to me, talking about, let's say, some of the Blue Prism conversions that we have been doing and looking to do in the future as well, has been the infrastructure footprint. Actually, we've seen that we started this off with the license cost in mind, and started, okay, we'll undercut some of the licenses with the consumption-based pricing. But the customers were mostly excited about was the infrastructure savings. So I don't need to host this orchestrator here. I don't need to host these super beefy VMs. I can actually run these in containers, or then run in lighter weight virtual machines, run multiple bots on the same virtual machine, etc. Some of these examples actually include customers halving their infrastructure bill in addition to halving their license bill. So that has been pretty significant. And my favorite part, like my favorite type of migration maybe being, we've seen people running things like Python-based bots through platforms like UiPath, which are definitely not designed to do that, but that somehow they have ended up with that kind of architecture. So that's just like lift and shift to Robocorp, which is Python native supported platform. So these are kind of the things that we see out there. It just makes a ton of more sense to run those Python-based bots on a platform that's actually made for them, instead of using a UiPath orchestrator to do so. So maybe I've covered all the big three that I've seen, but so many other examples out there. But I'll let Olivier you chime in as well.
Yeah. So we do a lot of assessment for the clients, and the typical trigger for them to consider another technology is, please first reduce the complexity, bring simplicity. So we talk about infrastructure. So infrastructure has a cost. It's not just the cost. You have large companies that are relying on other vendors, and there is always let's say a very long process to create a new bot and provision the infrastructure and do the network / firewall / installation / so it is perceived as it is not simple. It is difficult, and please help me go to a place where it's a lot easier to do. And what is connected to that is, please also help me handle the fear that I have of making a change, of basically. So right now, I give you a specific example. We have a client that has a certain install base, which is Gen1, and they now come to realize that they would like to have a dual vendor strategy. So we do introduce a Gen2 vendor in the mix, so that they basically build trust. They see the value, they understand the simplicity of working off the cloud, of having let's say a more flexible way of consuming. And we also show them slowly that not only you can introduce a new vendor to build new bot, but actually moving from this old bot to this new bot, crossing technology, is not a big deal, right? You assess correctly the situation, you understand the sending point, the receiving point, the two new technology, you understand the differences. They both have strengths and weaknesses that we have to handle. You basically convert the bot, and then you help the client through very heavy testing, help the client understand that the input-output of the new bot is exactly the same as the old one. So at the end of the day, the confidence that I can now use this technology that fulfill all my requirement and actually does exactly the same as the previous technology is something that, it's very easy to articulate to the client. If you correctly assess, you correctly convert, and you correctly test. Once it's tested and the outcome is there, the output is the same, then it's just, the trigger to decommission the old is very simple.
So how long does this usually take in your mind as you've gone through this, Olivier, this migration itself? Does it vary depending on the complexity?
Yes. When you assess an environment, not all bots are equal. You can have a very small bot that does a very simple, copy and paste reporting type of task, and then you have a monster of a bot that is not just RPA, that has a brain, it has vision, it has language, So it basically has a lot of capability, and it depends on the size. That's why assessing the environment, phasing the conversion, the simple bots, it's a matter of weeks. It's a matter of weeks, right? The more complex bots, you also want to make sure that the technology you are selecting as the receiving end has all the capability, because there's of course gaps and mismatch. Not all the technology have the same, let's say, object available, the same libraries available. So there's a number of things that needs to be done, but the assessment is really critical to understand what it is I can move as a first phase quite easily to build confidence, and then I can address the more complex one later on. So again, I would say from a few weeks to obviously a few months, if it's a month stuff about.
Fair enough. So Antti and Olivier, I've been asking some of the questions that have already been popping up in our Q&A box. So just continuing on that theme, because I think we're at the end of our narrative here today. But one other question that has come up, besides some of the ones that I've asked, is does Robocorp have a control room that has an option to trigger multiple bots dynamically, whenever a new transaction is received?
Yes, absolutely. We have, and we have been architecting the cloud-based control room solution from the ground up in a way that's gonna be able to handle transactional data for the bots pretty scalably. I'd say we are running thousands and thousands of bots over there right now, and we're just gonna be launching some of our work item management features soon enough, in a few weeks' time. I think I don't want to speak for my marketing team's behalf here, but so there's already building capabilities to be able to route work to bots and launch multiple bots to process work, do stuff like fan out work to multiple bots in concurrent, and then fan them in as results get picked. So kind of that takes advantage of the licensing, or the fact that there is no licensing scheme that would limit your concurrency. So you can have a elastic workforce in the cloud to operate that kind of workloads.
Excellent. Thank you, Antti. I think we have time for one more question. We're a little bit over time for what we had scheduled, but there's one other question that has popped up that I want to make sure we address. With respect to the migration plan, the question is, do we rewrite the workflows in Gen2, or are there porting utilities in Gen2?
Do you want to go there?
Yes. So there's multiple ways to approach this, right? So there's quite a few. So first of all, there's quite a few vendor out there who are basically trying to address this market, this conversion market, by if I take I move away from Prism and I go into Robocorp, right? So there is a way to extract, let's say XML, then to convert that to something that will be an abstracted view, a technology abstracted view of the bot, and then move that back into Robocorp, right? So there's a lot of people working on converter. Having said that, I don't believe that anyone is at a point where you can click a button and you can convert from A to B. So there is a need to rewrite a part of the bot, whether it's 10% or 90%. There is a need to rewrite a part of the bot. Now, having said that, people are making a big fuss about this, but this is not a big deal. You know exactly what the bot is doing. The starting point is not, I need to, reinvent the wheel. I need to define what the bot is doing. I need to do the discovery. I need to write, a solution document. All of that is done. All you got to do here is to take what the bot does, and you have visibility of that, and to convert it. If you have a tool that does 50% of the work, that's great, and you do the rest manually. This is not a big deal. I want, again, to downplay this idea that, it's not like moving a house, right? It's a lot easier to do the conversion.
Yeah, I would like to add on that. So we have been quietly building a conversion tool here to address first, Blue Prism, starting from that and adding other tools in there. What it'll do, it'll take the source code of a bot, convert that into a scaffolding, let's say 50-60% bot code, and allow the bot developer to fill in the rest. Now that's kind of a mechanical thing, though. I mean, it involves some algorithms, obviously, in there, some clever code, but at the end of the day, it's translating one logic to another, and oftentimes when you're doing this kind of migration work, you have the chance to actually, like, pause for a second, think, hey, is this error handling logic here, for instance, do we need it with the other platform, with Robocorp, for instance, or was it here to patch over the first gen platform's limitations? So kind of the just mechanical translation oftentimes doesn't result in the best possible end result, but we do have tools to facilitate that.
And just to add to that, because this is really important for the scaling and the longer term, this is allowing you to clean up. When you look at a COE, I'm going to say most of the time, you ask 20 people to write the same bot, they will do it in a different way. There's a lack of standard, lack of best practices in the industry today. And when you are doing a massive, you basically clean up. It's an opportunity to basically establish a framework, a standard, best practice, because you will have to run and maintain those bots, and again, remember, a large chunk of your cost is going to be through the run and maintain phase, which is an ongoing phase. So if you have a chance to rewrite, establish some best practices and standard, so it's a lot easier for you to maintain, or for your service provider to maintain, because once you rely on digital workforce, you want them to work, you don't want them down, right?
So very interesting conversation, Antti and Olivier. Infrastructure cost reduction, potentially a different architecture than what you see in Gen 1. Clearly, perhaps even reduced total cost of ownership, increased ROI, better management, and better cost efficiency around run and maintenance. These are some of the elements that we just talked about on Gen 2. And this has been a very, very exciting conversation with the two of you. I really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you, Shale. Thank you, Shale, for hosting it. There's been some excellent questions in the Q&A. So anyone who hasn't got their question answered, please reach out. I see a few of them out there that we just don't have the time for. But thank you, gentlemen. It was a great session.
Thank you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.